Hello, and welcome to another edition of the Historian of Truth. I am the Historian of Truth, and today we're going to look at a very interesting topic. Now, this is one topic that may be a little bit of a stretch for a lot of people. It's just one way that you can see this most iconic movie, the 1975 classic Jaws, starring Roy Scheider, Robert Shaw, and Richard Dreyfuss. And this directed by Steven Spielberg. And this is something that can be interpreted in the film. And I'm going to make a video thesis about this and about this movie, that this is not just a simple tale of a shark battling men. It's the very classic man versus nature, or man versus beast things, like storylines. But I'm going to look at this from an economic standpoint and say that this movie can be interpreted as promoting socialism and a socialist government and socialism economy. Okay? And so we're just going to get right into it. Most people have seen this movie. It came out in 1975 and it tells this story. It was one of my favorite movies. It still is one of my favorite movies because I grew up in a town just like the town of Amity. It was a beach town that relied on summer tourism. And so a lot of the characters that you see in the film are very similar to the characters that I used to see where I was growing up. And so the movie kind of hit home. We were around a lot of water. I was on boats a lot as a kid, and I even fished for sharks. And so this movie was just one. It's the animatronics are just amazing in it. The acting is bar none some of the best acting that's ever been done in a movie, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful tale. But for most people, if they've never even seen this movie, know the theme song, the very simplistic theme song that John Williams did, the dun dun. And everyone can play. When I was a kid, I remember everyone could play it on the piano, the far two left keys, the deep keys. You could play this song. Everybody knows that when everybody knows when they hear that song, it means the shark in Jaws. And it was actually brilliant filmmaking by Steven Spielberg, because if you know the backstory behind it, was that the shark was not working almost most of the time that they were filming. So Steven Spielberg had to come up with ways to show the shark without actually having to show the shark. And he used a lot of good camera angles, the barrels, things like that to make you think that there was a shark there. But in actuality, there wasn't one. I think the shark, they said, only shows up 15 minutes of the entire movie. And it's amazing with that. But if you don't know the story, if you've never watched the story, been or too scared to see it, what the story tells is there's a town called Amity Island where Roy Scheider plays the police chief, and he has just been working there maybe. I don't know, maybe less than a year he's been the police chief. He used to be the police chief in New York, so he apparently, according to it, he moved to Amity Island for a quieter existence. There's not many murders there. There's not a lot of crime there, and it's not like New York City. So he moves to this town and kind of he tries to blend in with the locals. Well, it just so happens that a great white shark, a very large great white shark, has been attacking residents who have been swimming at the beaches there. One young lady, of course, the beginning scene, which is iconic. It's one of the greatest opening scenes of a movie that's ever been. The only thing kind of close to it, I would say, is the beginning of Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark. where he's in the temple and he has to try to beat out all the booby traps and everything, getting the golden idol. But that scene is iconic, and it's a thrilling way to start a movie, with the girl thrashing around, and it's just an amazing piece of filmmaking, and just creativity all about. But her death and then the death of a young child, sparks them to try to get rid of this shark, and they think that they got rid of the shark, and the mayor wants the shark gone so that it won't frighten away the tourist. He wanted to pretend it wasn't a shark attack at the beginning so it wouldn't frighten away tourists, but then when the shark actually killed the child, he had to admit that, and they tried to kill the shark. They thought they killed the shark, but it actually was a tiger shark. And so then the shark then attacks another person while there's a bunch of people on the island coming there for summer break, thinking that the shark has been killed. It has not. It's scared away all the tourists. So Roy Scheider uses his authority as the police chief to hire shark killer Quint, played by Robert Shaw. And he also on this trip he had requested an oceanographer named Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, and they get on a boat and try to capture the shark. Well, as time goes on, the shark crashes into the boat, causing boat leaks, which floods the whole floods the whole boat, and slowly but surely the boat starts to sink. Um, and then eventually Richard Dreyfuss character Matt Hooper says, "Well, I'll get into the shark cage and try to kill him." The shark attacks the cage. Richard Dreyfuss manages to escape and hide under the water, and then the shark proceeds to jump onto the ship, breaking it. And when that happens, Quint accidentally slides down into where the shark is, and what proceeds to happen is one of the most iconic death scenes in any horror movie that you've ever seen. When he is eaten by the shark. Most people have seen it. It's so iconic. It was so well acted. And earlier in the film too, while they're on the boat, he gives his very famous Indianapolis speech. If you know this, he was on the USS Indianapolis, which was sunk, and survivors on that the crew had to try to survive in shark-infested waters, which most of them did not. But eventually, the shark attacks the boat again. Roy Scheider is able to throw one of Hooper's scuba diving tanks into his mouth, and then on the crow's nest, when the boat is sinking, the crow's nest still stays stable for him to be able to shoot at the the scuba tank. And then Roy Scheider, of course, says one of the great lines in movie history. He tells him, "Smile, you SOB." I'm not going to say the word, and he shoots it, and it blows up, and it's a great ending. The whole movie is just great. It's just a great movie. It's one of the all-time greats. I know some people rank it like 50th or whatever. No, I think Jaws is in the top 20, no doubt about it. It is just a great movie. But what I'm going to do now that I've described it is show you from my standpoint. Now, you may disagree with this, but I'm going to show you from my standpoint why I feel the movie Jaws is actually a commentary, maybe even a somewhat theatrical political advertisement for socialism. Now, some of you may be going, "Whoa, that's taken a little bit far." Well, let's just look at it. Let's just look at it from a standpoint before we even start. This movie was directed by Steven Spielberg. Most people know Steven Spielberg is pretty liberal in Hollywood. He's also, he grew up during the 60s. Okay, and he went to college in the 60s, and many of the people that were in college in the 60s were typical left wing. So it wouldn't shock me, that he, for one, would be somebody that would promote that and put kind of like a hidden meeting in the movie along with the writers and everything else, because it does follow the book somewhat, but there's a lot of his discretion of changing things, the way the shark dies, the way Quint dies, who survives at the end, because if you know anything in the book, Matt Hooper actually dies, but here he survives. And in the book, they don't stay out at sea. They go out and then they come back and then they go back out again, so there's a lot of different changes that he made in the movie from the book. So, he was given a little bit of creativity with that. But I just want you to see this from what it is. And first, we're going to start off by saying the shark. We're going to use the shark as an example of, I believe it is a representation of the kind of laissez-faire, what's called laissez-faire economic capitalistic society. Okay, laissez-faire means let it be. Okay, and that's the French for let it be, meaning you don't do anything in the economy. It's there when it was a popular opinion back in the late 1800s, or late 1800s, early 1900s, and even in the 1920s, of laissez-faire economics is you let the economy be. The government doesn't set up any rules for it. The government doesn't do anything. They leave the economy alone. The economy will go up, the economy will go down, it will go up, it will go down, but you don't do anything to mess that up. You leave it alone. Okay? With that, what happens is that if there is no rules for the economy to kind of focus on like that, or to kind of keep it under control a little bit, it will become out of control. Like you used to see that with a lot of the laissez-faire. There was the Panic of 1873, and then there was the Panic of 1908, I think it was, or '06. It was somewhere in there. Then there was the Great Depression, and these sorts of things. There were I think there was a Panic of 1893 too. There was always these panics and these depressions that lasted 4 or 5 years, but they didn't do anything for the economy. They usually left it alone. It wasn't until Franklin Roosevelt in the New Deal that the U.S. government started getting more involved with the economy, setting up rules and regulations to maintain stability with the economy. And you can see that the shark initially starts off as just an animal in the movie, but as time comes on, it becomes a focus of the pocketbooks and the economy. The shark starts taking a toll on the economy and of Amity Island. For example, when the shark kills the young kid, Mrs. Kittner's son, Alex, Mrs. Kittner asks for a reward of $3,000. Quint wants $10,000. Okay? The mayor is worried about the summer dollars that may be lost, and he wants to pretend like there's no problem. Okay? So you can see it. The shark means more than just being an animal to kill. It becomes an economic problem. It becomes like an economic focus. To Quint, it's about making as much money as he can. To Mrs. Kittner, to other fishermen, they want to kill it to get the money from Miss Kittner. The mayor wants the shark dead because it's costing them summer dollars. It's costing them money in tourism. Okay, so if you look at it symbolically, the shark is almost like the out of control economy. Okay, and then you have a mayor who likes to pretend like there is no problem. Just let it be. We're not going to deal with this. Initially, he doesn't want to deal with this. He's like, there is no shark. He tells him, what if you yell this out, barracuda? What? Huh? Nobody says anything. If you yell shark, we have a panic on the 4th of July. He wants to pretend like that young girl was not killed by a shark. It was something else. A boat hit it, or a boat hit her, or something else, and the propeller chopped her up, or whatever. That's what they want to pretend. But so the mayor is almost like the politicians who pretended when we had the out of control capitalism of the late 1800s and early 1900s. They're like the politicians who like to pretend like there was no problem. People like Warren G. Harding or Calvin Coolidge or whoever, that there wasn't an issue. Oh, the economy, or even Herbert Hoover. Herbert Hoover kind of sat back, really didn't do anything. He did a few things, but he just the economy will come back. Don't worry about it. Everything will work out. It's fine. There's nothing wrong with it. They like to pretend there's nothing wrong with it when there is problems. Monopolies were a problem. Wages were a problem. Overworking your employees was a problem. Because there was no rules. And animals aren't bound by rules. They kind of do what they want to do, and most of us don't do anything about it. It's like deer run wild, and so the shark can kind of be seen as kind of an out of control capitalist laissez-faire economy with no rules or regulations. Okay? And you can see this. When an economy is out of control and there are no laws, who does it hurt? Well, the first victim of the shark is a woman. So there may be some social commentary there by Steven Spielberg saying, well, and the writers of this movie saying, well, the first thing it hurts is women. They don't get equal pay. They don't get equal treatment. They're not making as much money as men. They're not as respected as men in the economy. So the women, this out of control economy, it hurts the women. Next, who does it hurt? The next victim is a young child. Children get hurt with out of control economies because of no child labor laws. Okay? Child labor was a big problem in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It was a very big problem. They had to pass the child labor laws, to stop that, because young kids, 4, 5, 6 years old, were working in the factories with their parents. They weren't in school, and then they would use sometimes the bosses, the managers would tell them, oh, go under this machine and grab this or fix this, and then the machine would crush them and they would die. So they had to put child labor laws in there, and that's why we still have them. Like in most states, a child can't work. Children can't work, until they're 15 usually, or 16 in some states. There's child labor laws, and even when they work, if it's under that, they have to have certain regulations. I remember back when I was a kid, the TV show Full House. They had to have the twins, Mary Kate and Ashley Olsen. They had to both work because of child labor laws. There was only a certain amount of time each of them were allowed to work because of the child labor laws in Hollywood. And so you can see this out of control economy. First, it hurts women because they don't get equal pay. Then it hurts children because of the child labor laws. It hurts the working man, the blue-collar worker, because they're not paid their wages. They're not paid acceptable wages at all. They don't. That's why we have a minimum wage, because they're not paid enough. And you can see this with the death of Quint. Quint we're going to talk about them. He is the representation of your blue-collar worker. And so that's who this economy hurts. And you'll notice that it's a great white shark. So guess what? That means that that a lot of these economies exclude minorities. Minorities are not even shown in this movie. There are no minorities because the out of control economy is they can't, the minorities, what I think what the movie is saying is they can't even participate in these economies. They just have to do it themselves. Okay? Now, I know this is kind of a radical interpretation and some of you may be like, "Ooh, wow, I think this little," but I'm just going to just, hey, just hear me out, and if you want to you can comment later on that. Okay? But basically, what they're saying is we have to kill this shark. Well, we have to kill the shark. Well, what does that mean? We need to get this economy under control. This economy is out of control. If you want to look at it, it's like the shark can be looked at as a monopoly, like John D. Rockefeller. It has to be busted up to bring back stability and calm to the economy. The economy is out of control. Okay. You can see that this theme, the economics and class warfare theme, is played out on the orca when the three men go out to try to kill the shark. We're going to use the characters in this. Quint. Quint, if you know anything, Quint served, he talks about how he served in World War II. Okay, which means he's a member of what we would call the World War II, the Great Depression generation, or what is called the Greatest Generation. Okay, he is a World War II vet who was severely traumatized by the war because he was, according to the story, on the USS Indianapolis. The USS Indianapolis was bringing secretly the atomic bomb to certain islands so that it could be dropped on Japan. Well, when they were returning, the Japanese submarine hit a torpedo into the ship, and the ship sunk, and all the men went into the water in the Indian Ocean, which is shark infested. And he tells the story of being in there for 5 days and seeing people eaten, and he bumped into a friend who was killed by one, bitten in half, and this sort of trauma it explains why he does not like sharks and why he hunts them. And he later says he never puts on a life jacket because he would much rather just drown and die than wait to be eaten by a shark. Okay, he's a survivor of the Depression. So what you can see, he is a working class person. Okay, he is a blue collar worker. That's why when you see him on the boat, he is wearing a shirt with a blue collar. What is a blue collar worker? Those are your average everyday workers, the ones that work in the steel mills, the ones that work in the automobile plants, these sorts of things. The guys who cut your lawn, plumbers. These are your average everyday workers, or what working class, or what Karl Marx would call the proletariat. Okay, these would be the proletariat. He says, I remember there's a scene in there where he's arguing with Matt Hooper, which we're going to talk about, and Hooper very very plainly looks at him in his boathouse, in Quint's boathouse, and says, "I don't need this working class hero crap." Okay, it's working class, blue collar. See, Spielberg and the writers are making it very clear that Quint is a representation of the World War II veteran, the member of the Greatest Generation, and a blue collar worker, which most of them were. Okay, he is in constant conflict with Hooper. This is a generational conflict. Okay, what that is, it's a conflict, and we're going to go to Hooper, but it's a conflict, and it was the conflict that was played out in the 60s with the Greatest Generation, or the World War II generation, versus their children, the baby boomers. Okay, and that's what we're going to see. Matt Hooper, played by Richard Dreyfuss, he represents the 1960s counterculture baby boom generation. Okay, he's a young fellow. Okay, um, he makes it very clear that his family is wealthy. Okay, he has a boat with expensive equipment on it, and he says he paid for it himself. And he's like, and Roy Scheider, who plays Chief Brody, says, "Are you wealthy?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "How much?" And he goes, "Well, me personally, or the whole family." So he comes from wealth. Well, most of the kids that or people that came from wealth that were baby boomers did not um, did not serve in Vietnam. Many of them either avoided the draft because they got exemptions, or they went to college. And we know Matt Hooper is an oceanographer, which means he probably, it's suggested, that he spent the Vietnam years in college studying, and that's how he avoided the draft. Okay, he avoided the draft. He mentioned that he was a sailor. Okay, so what Hooper also represents, if you're looking at it from a Marxist view, he would represent the bourgeoisie. Okay, the wealthy elite people. Okay, and you see, this is they're conflicting. It's two separate conflicts. Okay, and what Spielberg is doing here is he's using the outward appearance of a generational conflict, the conflict between the World War II Great Depression generation and the baby boom generation. Okay, and so he's using that outward to kind of subtly show the Marxist conflict between the proletariat working class versus the bourgeoisie upper wealthy class owners. Okay, Quint even mentions this. He says, he grabs his hands and says, "You've been counting money all your life." And then Richard Dreyfuss says, "I don't need this. I don't need this working class hero crap." So you can see that that you could see the class conflict playing out on the Orca between these two men. Okay, and what you do is there, but it's also, like I said, it's a generational thing, because if you know anything about the World War II generation, they were very, very upset with their baby boom children, with the way that they acted, the way that they dressed, the way that they talked, the fact that they didn't serve in Vietnam, and the fact that they spoke out so vehemently against their country, because many of them served in World War II. They were very patriotic people, and they thought of them as very, very spoiled, which is kind of ironic, because the greatest generation, the Great Depression generation, were the ones that spoiled them because they were their parents, you know, which was kind of ironic with it. But this kind of dynamic plays itself out in many, many movies. You know, you will see this kind of play out in many, many movies. Um, but it's a generational thing. It's kind of like and this also played out. The counterculture were upset at their parents because they felt like their parents were doing things too materialistically. I'm sorry, militaristically, not materialistically. I'm sorry, misspeak there. We're doing things more militaristically, because, of course, many of their parents served in World War II. So when they came home, they were very disciplined. You know, they were used to eating a certain way, getting up at a certain time. They had to have their haircuts a certain way. Women, their wives had to present themselves in a certain way, and everything was very, very disciplined. And that's why you see, like, the greatest generation, the baby boom generation, they kind of rebelled against that. they weren't, like the guys, it was supposed to be guys were supposed to have like almost like militaristic haircuts, and the girls were supposed to have long flowing hair. Well, you see it in the 60s. What starts happening? The girls start cutting their hair short while the guys grow their hair out. Okay, the greatest, the depression generation, they had clean shaven faces, while the counterculture, the baby boom generation, they grew their beards out, and you can even see that in that picture that's on the right. You can see Quint has just a little mustache, but you can see that, that his that Richard Dreyfuss right next to him has got longer hair, kind of a little bit more unkempt hair. He's got a beard kind of growing out. He's wearing glasses because, of course, glasses became very popular in the 60s as people wanted to look like Buddy Holly and the Beatles and all of that. And so you can kind of see that playing out. And what it is and this dynamic is also mentioned in songs too. Like if you ever heard that song Mike and the Mechanics song, The Younger Years, which was a story about, the singer was talking about his father dying, and how he regretted that he couldn't make amends with his dad because they admit that they don't see eye to eye. His dad probably was, I believe, a World War II vet, and or of that generation, and then he, the lead singer, he was of the baby boom generation, and they didn't see things, but they were still family. Okay, and that's something that you see is one thing you see is that they even though they are conflicting, you'll see that conflict, even though they're conflicting, they have a lot in common. You see that those two generations have a lot in common. If you watch it, like I said, Quint on the boat is wearing a blue shirt, so Hooper is wearing a blue sweater. Chief Brody's not wearing blue; he's wearing black. Okay, but those two who are in conflict are wearing the same color. When they start sitting down if you remember that famous scene where they're sitting in the boat at nighttime, they're comparing their scars that they got from sharks and the shark attacks that they both experienced. See, what they're saying is they act like they're different. The two generations act like they're different, but in actuality they're the same. They're actually the same when they get down to it. They're kind of fighting over kind of non-important things. It's more like outward. They just don't like, they believe the same things. They just don't like the actions that they take. Hooper, for example, wants to study the sharks. Quint wants to kill the shark. But they both, it appears they both like sharks. you know they both have something for sharks, you know and so it's like they have a lot in common, but they just don't agree. It's just like the depression generation and the baby boom generation. They have a lot in common, they just don't agree with the methods that they're using and the way that they're acting. It's more outwardly than it is when they get down to the brass knuckles of it. It's they really aren't that different, because that's what it is Quint is like of the greatest generation. He's like a New Deal Democrat, of the supporter of Franklin Roosevelt, something like that. Whereas Hooper's like the representation of the 1960s radical, or what they refer to as the New Left. They both agree that the government should be involved in the economy. It's just to what extent. It's to what extent. It's basically the debate is over how the government should go in intervening in the U.S. economy. You see? And that sort of dynamic is playing out. That's the outward dynamic that he's showing in the movie, but really underneath that, there's a hint of Marxism that's playing out between them, because they really don't complain about, they really don't complain about the fact that one was more patriotic by serving their country while the other one dodged the draft. They don't complain about that. What do they complain? One complains about him having money and he didn't. He was a working class guy. That's the proletariat versus the bourgeoisie dynamic that Karl Marx speaks about in his Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital and all of his works, and that later Marxist leaders like Lenin and all that played off of it. Okay, so really, you can see it. That's class conflict. And the class conflict is occurring because there's an economy, the shark, which is out of control. Okay, it's a monopoly. It's out of control economy. There's no, there's no rules for it. And so the debate is over how far should they go. How far should they go into the economy? That's the subtle underlying meaning. So I hope that all makes sense. Basically, they're debating over how far they should go. It's basically New Deal versus socialism and communism, and that sort of dynamic was played out. That's why the greatest generation got mad at the baby boomers and a lot of the counterculture, because they were almost communistic and wanted to almost overthrow. They said, no, we want to be involved somewhat in the economy, but we don't want to change everything. And they started, the counterculture were supporting people like North Vietnam and Russia and these sorts of things. And it really made the greatest generation, the Depression generation, the World War II generation, very angry because at their children and at that generation. And there was constant class conflict between mother and father and their children over this. Okay, and that dynamic is played out between Quint and Hooper. That's played out between them. Chief Brody doesn't get in conflict with them. Okay, but that's being played off, and that proletariat and that the proletariat and bourgeoisie conflict that is spoken of by Karl Marx is also played in it subtly underneath there. Okay. There's no real difference between the two. They both believe that the economy, that the government needs, that there needs to be something done about this economy, keep it under control. They just differ on how far and the methods. That's what it comes down to. Okay. Now, of the three, um, of the three, you there is Chief Brody, who's played by Roy Scheider. The police, of course, works for the government. Okay, he wears a black shirt. Okay, like I said, unlike Quint, unlike Richard, unlike Matt Hooper, he wears black. So he sets himself out. He shows himself to be different from the other two characters. While the other two are wearing blue, he's wearing black. What Chief Brody represents is government involvement in the capitalistic economy. Okay, the government has to get involved. That is the underlying theme here. He doesn't know about the government doesn't know about the economy. Okay, they don't really participate. The government really doesn't participate in the economy. See, who participates in the economy? The proletariat does. The blue collar person, the shark hunter, the shark. The shark represents the out of control economy. The shark hunter participates in the economy. The bourgeoisie participates in the economy. Who is that? That's Matt Hooper. He studies it. He studies the economy. And he participates himself and makes himself wealthy. The government stands in as the referee. Okay? If you know that about a lot of referees, what do they wear? Black. Referees kind of black or black and white. So that's what he is. He's the referee between them. He's the referee between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. The government has to step in to keep both sides happy and to get control of this economy. And if you see it at the end, the movie is making a very profound statement. In the end, the proletariat cannot get the economy under control. Who's the proletariat? That's Quint. He dies. Okay? The bourgeoisie can't get the economy under control either. Who is that? That's Matt Hooper. In the movie, he fails to kill the shark, but in the book, he actually dies. So who kills the shark and brings stability back to the economy? Who kills the shark and gets that out of control economy under control? The government. Chief Brody shoots and kills it. The government gets the economy under control and gets the society back in order. So when the government is in control of the economy, okay, which is what we would call socialism, okay, the message of the movie is when the government gets control of the economy, then law and order and stability and calmness returns. Basically, you can look at Chief Brody as Franklin Roosevelt. He's like the Franklin Roosevelt. He brings about the New Deal and the new regulations and everything to get the out of control economy of the 1920s, the Roaring 20s, and the great then the aftermath of it, all of the bad things that happened during the Great Depression under control, so that these sorts of things don't happen again. Okay? So, as I was saying, as you can see, there is a little bit of a hidden message here in the movie Jaws. And I'm just going to reiterate. The shark represents the out of control economy. Now, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but I'm just going to say he represents the laissez-faire, out of control economy. Okay? The laissez-faire, out of control, no sort of, the buyer beware, no sort of rules, no like FTC or SEC or any of these government agencies to kind of keep the economy in check and keep the people honest. So, to prevent the snake oil salesmen and all of this. So it's it kind of represents an out of control economy. The out of control economy, when it's out of control, hurts women with pay and respect. It hurts children because children can be forced to work. It hurts minorities because usually they, it back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, seems like they couldn't participate much in the economy, and it needs to be tamed. So, on the Orca, you have the proletariat, represented by Quint, versus the bourgeoisie, represented by Matt Hooper. This kind of Marxist conflict that is presented in the Communist Manifesto, and then you have the government represented by Chief Brody. And in the end, as I said, the bourgeoisie can't get the economy under control. The out of control economy hurts them. Okay? The bourgeoisie can't get the economy under control because they benefit from it being out of control. And usually they don't care if it's out of control or whatever, because usually they have a lot of money and it doesn't matter. So they're not interested in getting it under control. Okay? So who has to get it under control? The government does, represented by Chief Brody. The government has to step in and create programs and create rules and regulations that the economy must follow to maintain stability and to prevent monopolies and to prevent all sorts of other issues that come up when the economy is out of control. Well, I hope everyone was interested in this video. I really do. It's a great movie. Maybe I'm off base here. Let me know in the comments if I'm off base with this. But I just see this as a I see this as a political commentary by Spielberg and the writers in promotion of either the New Deal or socialism in government control in the economy. I don't think it goes to the line of communism, but you could see definitely in socialism, socialism is the first step towards communism. And so, Spielberg, as I said, was a member of that baby boom generation, and he grew up and he was there during the 60s, and he might have been making a political statement through these characters in this storyline. And it's just what I think. But tell me what you think. If I'm off base with this, I could be. Just let me know. I thank you all for tuning in. This is the historian of truth saying class is dismissed.